They told you that good old blue-collar Joe was going to be just a normal, everyday guy, one of the folks. He was going to come back and run this presidency the way that you'd expect a sappy 90s movie about a president to do, right? Just a guy who rolls up his sleeves, loves baseball, apple pie, and good old-fashioned American hard work. But then you actually see what's happening in the country, and you say, hold on a second. This is not what we were promised. This is not what we were told. And some of us were predicting this all along, that Joe Biden was, of course, the Trojan horse. He was the guy that the Democrats could convince enough voters in enough states, oh, he's not like the rest of all of those Democrats. He's not a left-wing loon. You know, he's just a guy who's been around a long time, and he'll make sure that the country is nice and calm and everything goes just fine. Total nonsense. We've already had a Texas judge halt Biden's executive order stopping deportations for 100 days, and he cited the law that restrained Trump, right? Administrative Procedures Act. You can't just make this huge shift in federal policy, turning on a dime. Oh, gosh, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, or the Biden, as the case may be. Turns out that the hashtag resistance judiciary against Trump set some precedents, some very useful ones that are currently being applied against the Democrat president. So there will be howls of indignation, but this is the system we have. This is what we've got. So Joe Biden coming in and acting like there's no need for Congress or legislation on these issues, that's not going to fly right away. And if it makes its way up to the Supreme Court, we got a pretty good shot in making sure that it doesn't go forward beyond that. I can't give you any guarantees. John Roberts is basically a liberal. Thank you, George W. Bush. Roberts is effectively a liberal on the Supreme Court. He's a Chief Justice, and he is someone who cannot be trusted on principle, on morality, or on constitutionality. But I do think that Amy Coney Barrett is sound, and I think that Kavanaugh will probably apply the law, even if it upsets the New York Times editorial page. But yeah, we're all seeing who Joe Biden really is. What has been done in this first week of the Biden presidency? Here we are. It has been a week. What has happened? Well, we've seen a whole slew of executive orders, far more than any other presidency at this point, meant to effectively replace the legislative prerogative of Congress with the unitary executive, right? The one and only. He is the guy. Big changes on immigration enforcement, changes like the Paris Climate Accord, the executive order on transgender protections, which is allowing now transgender male athletes to compete against women. That's a real big focus for the Democrats. They know that's critical all across the American heartland. That really keeps people up late at night. That there have not been enough transgender males who have been able to compete in women's sports. That's just something that's very important to Democrats. And now we have this vendetta against the fossil fuel industry playing out. Federal agencies are going to stop all fossil fuel subsidies, and also they're going to put a halt to drilling on federal land. I want to ask you something. How different would this presidency be if you had had a president, Bernie Sanders? I mean, really think about that. How different would this presidency be so far if you had had a president, God forbid, Ocasio-Cortez? The answer is not very different at all. In fact, I think the executive orders that you've seen so far are largely in line with what you would have expected from an even more radical left president. You would have expected this from somebody else along the way. And now when you start to dig into not only the orders, but the tone of this administration, I mean, they're pushing forward with this impeachment, knowing that it's not going to actually have the desired effect of banning Trump from future office. It's not going to happen. They already held a vote a procedural vote, thank you, Rand Paul, in which 45 senators said this is just unconstitutional. This whole thing is ridiculous. It's a joke. 45. So they're not going to get to the 2/3 majority. If the process is unconstitutional to 45, you're not getting to a 2/3 majority to convict. It's not going to happen. So then what the heck are we doing? The country is still suffering through a pandemic. But, some of this, I believe, is a distraction technique as well. Sure, there's the ideological imperative that the left has to get this stuff done right away, right off the bat, to inundate the system, to flood the zone with all the left-wing goodies they possibly can. I get that. But anybody who's seeing how this Biden administration actually functions with the COVID response, for example, with the vaccination programs, realizes, so we were sold the bill of goods, we being the American people. They don't know what they're doing. They're not better at this. They don't have some secret plan. They're not, so much smarter than the people who were in these jobs before them. That was just all PR, marketing, lies, essentially. It just wasn't true. They've had to scramble to make it seem like their plan wasn't going to be just a continuation of the Trump plan that they also told us, in a just act of absolute dishonesty and hubris, that they had to start from scratch. So they lied about the previous plan. They overpromised on their plan. And now we see we've got clowns in charge now. You've got people, Klain and Psaki and Biden and Harris. People don't know anything. They're not great administrators. They don't have some vision for the country. The only thing that they really know they want to get done is whatever the Democrat apparatus tells them to do and whatever the left-wing activist base demands. Everything else can wait. Everything else is secondary. Your business, your livelihood, your safety of you and your family. COVID vaccinations are supposed to be protecting all of us. The Biden administration comes in like a bunch of bumbling buffoons. They're not making the situation better. But even when you listen to the rhetoric, when you hear some of what Joe Biden is saying out there, how different is it really from what you would expect from even the most far left-wing members of the United States Congress? Here he is talking about how, and that's one of the favorite things that Democrats and the left like to do, one of their favorite routines is to bash America to show how much they care about America. And ultimately, it's about they think they're better than this country and they have to radically transform it to live up to their lofty ideals. But they do like to trash our past. They like to trash what we've been, what got us to this point as the wealthiest, most prosperous nation of the world. And you hear this even in Joe Biden's commentary. Here he is when he's talking about how we don't live up to our principles. Play 6.
We have never fully lived up to the founding principles of this nation, to state the obvious, that all people are created equal and have a right to be treated equally throughout their lives. And it's time to act now, not only because it's the right thing to do, but because if we do, we'll all be better off for it. For too long, we've allowed a narrow, cramped view of the promise of this nation to fester. We've bought the view that America is a zero-sum game in many cases. If you succeed, I fail. If you get ahead, I fall behind. If you get the job, I lose mine. Maybe worst of all, if I hold you down, I lift myself up.
This is the warmed over cultural Marxism that we all should have expected from Joe Biden. Now, I know you'd say, oh, that seems harsh. No, it's really not. Listen to what he's saying. America is a zero-sum game. If I hold you down, I raise myself up. Is that really an accurate description of what's going on in this country? The explosion of wealth that has occurred in America over the last 100 years for everyone. I know the left doesn't like to talk about this, but a person today who is living, let's say, just at the poverty line compared to what a person in America who was doing quite well for the time in terms of their actual wealth and access and living standards from 100 years ago, it's not even close. We are much wealthier and more prosperous as a society, but envy is powerful politics. And creating this perception that the only thing that's holding some people back is the other people in America who are oppressing them. That's very powerful as well for Democrats. It's in fact central to their overall governing philosophy, because now you're going to hear a lot more about equity. You're going to hear a lot more about the same outcomes, not the same opportunities, not the same rules, not the same playing field, the same outcome for individuals as a historical balancing. Who's really going to be in charge of that? You're also going to see a return of the more brazen intersectionality discourse, right? Remember, intersectionality is just a fancy way of the left saying that society is all just warring factions, identity groups, tribes of sorts. That's what society really is. Gender, political, race, you name it. Society is all about these different groups that are going after each other, trying to oppress each other. This is what intersectionality says. And the government's role is to decide who's doing too well and who's not, and to start to balance that out. You want to talk about zero-sum game, the Democrat worldview is a zero-sum game. The Democrat view of their fellow Americans is exactly that. If some people are doing too well, the answer is not to allow others to do well too. It's to bring down those who are succeeding. You're going to see a lot of this, although they're not going to bring down the billionaires because they're already well beyond the reach of government. They're already more powerful than the government in many cases. You talk about the Silicon Valley barons and Amazon.com. No, they're going to pull down people who are just beginning to enjoy the fruits of their labors. They're going to pull down the successful small businessman who maybe has been able to weather the pandemic so far, the lockdowns, everything else, but now needs to pay even more in taxes, even higher wages. They're going to pull down people that have been saving and looking to buy that dream house. Sorry, you got to pay more. Pay your fair share. Remember that? Biden is a product of the Obama administration. You have to keep that in mind. This is Obamaism 2.0. The only difference here is that Joe Biden came along promising unity, normalcy, and decency. And what we're going to get is leftism, government overreach, and freedom under assault. That's the expectation we should all have for the next 4 years.
Hey, Team Buck, thank you so much for watching The First on YouTube. If you like this video, please click that little thumbs up button so then it will log as liked. And also, if you want to see more great content from The First, please click subscribe.